This.
The next one is yours. The one after mine is yours.
Okay, it got frozen. So okay. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, National Library of Medicine here, and NIH GRI for the grant, and Phil Byrne for coming here and moderating the discussion. I'd like to provide a high-level overview of what we considered and advised on the digital domain. Next slide. This isn't working. Okay. This chart actually shows something that you're all very familiar with, in terms of the old regime, the print paradigm, and the network paradigm. And the takeaway lesson of this is really that there's been a tremendous shift, both qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative, you're all familiar with, but qualitatively, at least from a legal standpoint and from an institutional standpoint, offers great new opportunities for sharing information in a way that is blocked by the old laws and the old institutions of the print paradigm. And so I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the legal and the institutional problems. There are obviously huge potentials of the networked information, but there are all kinds of obstacles, and they're not being dealt with very well. From a legal standpoint, there has been a tightening of the law from a digital copyright standpoint. There are contractual overrides and digital locks on a lot of material that's online, especially from a contractual standpoint. We allow a lot of adhesion contracts to override what few limitations and exceptions are available in copyright. From the database standpoint, Betsy already mentioned the database law in the European Union, and fortunately that was blocked here. But there's an uneven kind of legal regime internationally because of that. And so, and finally, there's the automated knowledge discovery tools that are viewed more as a threat than as a promise or as an opportunity. And so, you know, digital rights management tools and data mining are disallowed, even though we really need to apply automated discovery tools more and more on big data. So what does science need? We identified a number of legal approaches, tailor-made exceptions for publicly funded research, for copyright, breaking those digital locks, which Jerry Reichman wrote an article on, and we explain in the book, on reverse notice and takedown. Disciplining these adhesion contracts that are allowed for shrink wrap and click-through licenses that override any kinds of exceptions and limitations in copyright law. Aligning database protection law with copyright exceptions, because even though the European Union tried to harmonize database protection, they didn't actually require it, and so there's different kinds of implementations in different countries. And finally, this is probably not going to happen, but adjusting the international legal framework through a treaty to accommodate the needs of science, and amending the Copyright Convention. The hard reality really has been, or the trends, as Jerry has already been pointing out, is that intellectual property law internationally has been getting broader, stronger, and longer over the last 50 years or so. And that trend we see as continuing, at least from a treaty, international treaty and domestic legislation kinds of perspectives. So the scientific community really has to take the legal and institutional control over the situation and carve out its own space, as we argue. This is just not working. Okay. From an institutional standpoint, you all know about the changing role of the publishing intermediaries over the last 50 years or so, going from universities to the scientific societies to the commercial publishers, and now it's in flux with open access publishing. And so there's been a lot of turmoil in the publishing intermediary space, and the roles are being readjusted. There are a lot of impediments to pooling data and to network collaboration, particularly from a commercial standpoint. The Bayh-Dole Act has pushed a lot of public research into the commercial or pseudo-commercial kinds of approaches. And so the conclusions that we reached in this first chapter was to a lot of the disconnect between the public and the private sectors has been because of different people not really communicating, not talking past each other, and I think, or we think that there has to be a greater convergence between the public science communities and the private sector IPR community. That would also translate into a greater coherence between the innovation policy and public science policy. And in particular, we developed a number of approaches in the book to digitally integrate this infrastructure. The next chapter focused primarily on journals, and you all know about the open access paradigm and how that's changed publishing, especially of journal literature over the last 15 years or so. We did a empirical study of about 303 microbial journals, or journals in microbiology, and the licensing practices that they use. I can't go into detail because of time constraints, but a number of important conclusions stand out. One is that we conducted this in 2009, and at that point, about half the journals were either open access or hybrid type of arrangements. In other words, you could buy open access. And that was actually quite a high number, about 50% in a few short years. It hasn't changed a lot in the last 6 years or so, but we were encouraged by that trend. We also looked at the 10 top microbiology journals and found that only one was open access. And that's consistent with what we've seen in other disciplines, in the sense that the highest rank, with the old ISI index, journals, highest impact factors, are not open access yet, and primarily because they have a captive audience. But I think that will change probably the most gradually, but from the bottom up, it's definitely changing quite quickly. Another area that I'd like to emphasize is the law journal model, and that is that we never actually hear much about that in the discussions of open access journal publishing and in scientific publishing generally. And the law journals actually have developed an approach that's that's unique and that's worth considering. One advantage, I believe, is that the authors can submit articles at the same time to a number of journals, and instead of seriatim, and that speeds up tremendously the number of the publication of the results and the ability of the authors to publish in the best venues. The students themselves, it's run by the university, so the students use the publishing as a vehicle for educating and providing the labor, and so there's a very low cost to the journals themselves, and the journals are published through intermediaries. I think there are only 2 of them in the country that are service providers not capturing the content as they do in other scientific disciplines. And so I think there's some lessons to be learned from looking more carefully at the law journal context. A lot of it is open access, and it has a lot of advantages that I think could be transferred to the scientific publishing approach, although there are also some differences. Since I only have a few minutes left, I think I will talk about the last chapter, which focuses on the data issues and then talks about integrating the diverse information streams in what we call open knowledge environments. We looked at the early release policies of the genomic data approach from Bermuda to Fort Lauderdale to Toronto, and that's an interesting model that needs to be considered also in other contexts. We looked at other kinds of reference data in microbiology, mostly systematic biology data. A lot of them are open access now and have good models, and so the field of microbiology, I think, from a data standpoint, is getting fairly robust in terms of the legal approaches. From a data sharing standpoint, we looked at both fully public good commons as well as semi-commons, which are more consortia of institutions that protect the data or information within their consortium, and that has proved to be quite useful especially in the life sciences, and has shared data at least within public-private partnerships among companies working on the same area and universities. So there are different models, different commons types of approaches, both fully open for the community to use, as well as for a consortia to use to develop new products and services. I would just like to say a few words about the open knowledge environments, because this is my last slide, I promise. And if you look at the first slide again of the the changing nature of qualitatively and quantitatively, and look at the opportunities posed by the digital networks. We have not really taken advantage of it at all, in particular with regard to transferring scientific journals wholesale onto the network and declaring success. I think what you really need to do is deconstruct the whole scientific communication process and reconstruct it in a way that takes advantage of the network environment. And that really requires different institutions, different models, different legal rules, and culture. We looked at several examples already that from microbiology that you see here, but we looked at integrating, instead of a stovepipe kind of journal approach, where you have a bunch of disconnected articles being published as if this was still the print model, and integrating it holistically in a way that is more interactive, that includes more of the university's potential, the computer library, discipline domain areas, and even in consortia of universities, and used for educational purposes and for research and problem solving in a thematic, holistic way, and combining open access journals, including harvesting of existing repositories in a thematic way, adding databases, open source software, and using these portals basically as a vehicle for pushing the boundaries and making better use of the networks that are now common. Thank you.